What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and this one I'm going to break down what's going on with the overall market, what's happening with Apple, and remind you guys about what I said yesterday, and talk about how this relates to the Qqq and Nvidia. But before I do anything like this, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am firstly not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you're guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very, very soon, so check it out as it ends in just about 10 days. Anyways, now let's talk about the market. How are things looking? So I just wanted to mention that on the QQQ on the 4-hour time frame, we're starting to turn a little bit more bearish. But the question is, are we going to continue to sink? And what could cause this thing to sink even lower? And the answer is Apple stock. Like I told you guys yesterday, Apple has this event for September 12th. It's going to be a launch event, and they could be announcing the next iPhone 15 or even some new Apple Watches. So this is some big news for Apple. However, despite the fact that this news is coming out, and despite the fact that Apple was pumping, which helped, SPY and the QQQ pump quite a bit for the week before they started to look weak towards the end, something is going on with Apple that could end up dictating the markets. I did talk about this yesterday in my video, so if you want more details, just watch that video. But just as a reminder, we have this, triple negative divergence on Apple right here. If you look at this, this bearish development right here, we actually formed three of them on the MACD and also on the RSI, suggesting that this thing is going to see a rug pull soon. Now, it doesn't have to be a massive one. It doesn't have to be like so huge and so crazy, but I could see Apple cooling off on the RSI a bit, especially because it's very overbought on the 4-hour time frame. And the MACD is showing us that the buyers are getting more and more exhausted on this thing. So seeing that it's overbought and it is due for a bit of a pullback, there are two possibilities for Apple. It might come up a little bit more to fill its gap around 190, then start selling off if we do continue to develop the bearish divergence, or it might start selling off as soon as on Tuesday. And if that's the case, if this thing continues to sell off, I'm going to be watching it come all the way down to the mid 180s. Like 185 would be completely normal, or even lower than that. But I think there's a good chance of it coming down there by Thursday or Friday, and then getting a bounce after that, getting a really nice bounce and starting to push approaching the event, which is where this blue vertical line is. This is the date of the event. So we might see this thing kind of like sell off a little bit and get a nice bounce. And I think that this could affect the whole market. Now, the bounce may not be that profound, not that big. So we have to be very careful. And also after the event, we could always see Apple sell off again or not. I'm not 100% sure about that. It depends on the event and other factors. But all of this volatility is going to affect the market. So I want to break that down for the QQQ. Now, on the QQQ, all right, as this thing sells off, you're going to be watching some very, very critical support on this thing. You're going to be watching this zone right here, this 374 area as a key level. If that breaks, it's going to start sinking all the way down, in my opinion, towards these imbalances. And we could see this thing, fill these imbalances towards like 370 to 368. Now, assuming that we do get the bearish case and Apple does end up causing the sell-off, I want to draw out how this could end up looking like. Now, please note, I can't predict the future perfectly, especially like 2 or 3 weeks into the future, but I can give you guys just my estimate of it. I may have to adjust this if any new news comes out, but for now, here's how it's looking at the time I'm recording this, excuse me. So for the QQQ, there's a chance this thing could kind of gap up, depending on Apple. I don't know if it's going to be forming kind of like a head and shoulders here, if the high is already in or not. I'm not too sure about that. And it might just start to sell off as time goes on. If the selling becomes more aggressive, you're going to be watching the critical support at 376. That's going to be very, very key. And if that breaks, this level right here around 374 is going to be key as well. So we're going to be watching this zone right here. Now, if we end up breaking below this 374 zone, I could see this thing starting to sink a lot lower. So that's going to be a very, very key level. It depends if that breaks or not. And this could start to turn more and more bearish as we have these imbalances that need to get filled. Now, we have this zone right here, right? We're going to be watching the support to see if this, support holds at 374. If that breaks, it's very possible for this to continue selling off thanks to Apple, and Apple could drag this down if it continues selling. And we could see this thing approach 368 to 370. Nvidia could also affect this big time, so it might form a bottom very soon. Depending on how low it goes, I would not rule out the possibility of 368 to 370. And then we could see a bounce after that. Then by the time the week ends next week, we have the next week coming for September 11th, we should see a nice rebound, and then we should be pumping approaching Apple's event. So we could see a retest of like 375, 376 around there. And then when Apple's event comes, I don't know if Apple's going to pump this thing higher, if Apple keeps exploding, or if Apple sells off. It all depends on Apple's event. But I see this as being a very possible, path that the QQQ could follow. It's also possible for it to like push a little higher, try to fill its gap at like 382 before it comes back down. I'm not too sure about that, guys, to be honest with you. I don't know if it's going to pump one more time and then start dropping as of right now. It all depends on Apple. But it is looking like this thing is getting ready to turn. It could start turning as soon as Tuesday. It's also going to be a low volume week because of the fact that the market's closed for Monday, which is going to be Labor Day. That's going to be important. Now, for Nvidia, this is also looking very, very interesting to me. With Apple's events, I don't think that Apple alone is enough to like really dictate Nvidia, but Nvidia is starting to show signs that's starting to turn because when you look at the way this thing has been moving, let me just zoom in a little bit. You will notice that now, although Nvidia had this like inverse head and shoulder structure, the problem is, do we maintain this bullish structure? Now, we could still be bullish overall, but this thing could still correct first before we continue to get our bounce. That's a real possibility. The structure was bullish. We made this like higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high. The list goes on. We were bullish initially, then we turned sideways, very stationary. Then we started to turn a little bit more bearish. So the question is, and Nvidia hasn't really confirmed this yet, if Nvidia gets the bounce, will Nvidia establish a lower high? If it does so, could this develop into a head and shoulders? And the odds do favor that, in my opinion, but I'm not going to promise it until we get this confirmation. So, what do I mean? What do I mean by confirmation? We have to see this retest 490 or so and see if we establish a lower high. Because if we still try to break out like this could still be a bullish trend. There's still a possibility of that, even though it's looking less likely. What looks more likely is Nvidia tries to pop a little bit by Tuesday or so and starts to sell off a little bit. We might start to see it start to sink to like 480 or so. And then whether it goes lower or not depends on the severity of any like news and factors like that, because we have strong support right here in this area. This is where these previous resistance levels tended to be. So we're going to be watching, do we break below 480 or not? We came very close to it on Friday. If it breaks, I mean, it could come all the way down to this imbalance, could start sinking all the way down back to like 465. And this could be like approaching Apple's really big event. And then we could just see it kind of like chop around, sell off a little bit more, and get close to like 460 or so. And finally, when Apple like starts to balance the next week afterwards, we could see it just try to push up, approaching Apple's event and make its way right back up to these higher levels. And then I don't know if Nvidia is going to hold or not. It will depend on Apple. If Apple causes a sell-off or not, I'm not too sure about. But we could see something like this for Nvidia for the next like week and a half. The market may sell off a bit more because of how Apple is turning, because of the exhaustion we're seeing on SPY and the QQQ, and because of what we're continuing to see developing on the charts. So hopefully this video was helpful. I want to make this one kind of short. I'm not necessarily like a perma bear or a perma bull. I'm just trying to call out what is very possible. And with that said, I hope you guys have a very happy Labor Day for tomorrow. I'm going to be releasing another video about all the different charts and stuff. We'll see if there's any new news. For now, at the time I'm recording this, we're not really seeing it. And with that said, have a great weekend, everyone, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you. Nvidia, Apple, and Tesla, and all these different stocks to the moon, because the long term is very bright. And peace out.